way to do it. So tonight we're talking about Holocaust theater, and especially Michelle Colos Brooks's play, Hitler's Tasters, which for me was not only a really important play to bring into the festival, but also an important because I think it's a really good play, but also because it takes a look at the Holocaust in a way that I think Americans do not often look at the Holocaust. And I found this play, it reminded me very much of European plays that I've seen of the Holocaust, more so than American plays. American plays, and if I could just take a minute to do a little kind of background on Holocaust theater, American plays or even early plays about the Holocaust would often focus on the horror or on the atrocity. There might be some humorous sections to the plays, like the very famous play about the Pope by Rolf Hochhuth, the deputy, or there's another title as well, The Representative, A Christian Tragedy. And that's a very dark and very ponderous play, very intellectual play, and really brings out the issues of whether the Pope did enough in order to save Jews and in order to help to broadcast what was going on in the world at the time of the Holocaust. Of course, there's the Diary of Anne Frank, which I think in some ways actually you reference in your play, Michelle, and we can talk about that a little bit later. There are all sorts of little interesting kind of tidbits or crumbs of references that I found in the play. I don't know if that's true, but I'm thinking that there are. So the Diary of Anne Frank, which of course is the story of this brilliant young girl and the ways that she not only kept a diary, but then the family that was in the attic and the ways that they survived, or at least how they were able to continue to live and have some semblance of life and of who they were, keeping their identity despite the fact that they were so oppressed. And then you look at films as well, and films often go into a very dark and go into the atrocity in a much more horrific way. And I think that's very difficult to do on stage. So rarely do you see something like that on stage. But in your play, Michelle, which is what I loved about it, is it took a kind of stance of humor, using laughter, and took a situation where, at least on the face of it, does not seem horrific. There are a bunch of young women kind of sitting around together on their cell phones, doing selfies, talking about guys, being, sometimes mean girls. And then you kind of spring, what's happening behind it all. So I wonder if you could just talk about that and why you decided to take this subject and then portray it the way you did.
I actually, I didn't expect to talk about this, but when you mentioned Anne Frank, you caught, there is a little reference there. As a matter of fact, one of the characters, Anna, was named after Anne Frank. But it just
and you have Margot as well.
That's true. Her sister was Margot, although I didn't make that connection until later. I actually named Margot after the woman who told her story about being Hitler's food taster, which was a woman named Margot Volk. But until you said that, I had forgotten that before I went to Amsterdam a couple of years ago, I wanted my son to see Anne Frank's house. And before I went, I read, I had read Diary of Anne Frank a couple of times, but I read Miep Deese's book, The Woman Who Helped Them Hide. Mm-hmm. And I got so much perspective that Anne didn't have by reading Miep's book. And it was really interesting to look at her experience of helping them, without Anne knowing what's going on and her family know what's going on. And maybe that influenced me in writing this, from this perspective, because, and it hadn't occurred to me until you just said that, David, but I remember thinking, oh, it's kind of extraordinary to be able to turn the lens, and we know the story over here, but now we're starting to see it from over here. So maybe that influenced me, but you know, when I first heard that this woman, Margot Volk, had told her story, she was about, I think, 94, 95 years old, and claimed to be one of Adolf Hitler's food tasters. And when I heard this, I mean, when I caught wind of the story, my first thought was like, wow, isn't adolescence hard enough? Like, you have to be, I mean, the idea of young women sitting in a room with nothing to do but wait for a meal that they would have to eat, and they might die after every meal. I mean, that just seems so loaded with everything that you would want to explore as a playwright. I think I came initially to the story through the thinking about the girls, and the way that my concerns about the way that young women are treated, the way that they're sort of lifted up and then discarded very easily, the way that they're treated as expendable, the way that children are used as shields of war in a way, the way that we indoctrinate children. And then, of course, the Holocaust, and the idea also that, you know, they're sitting around waiting to see if they're going to die. It's a parallel with their contemporaries, well, with young people that were in the camps, that are sitting around waiting to die.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because now you're reminding me of another play about women that were in the camps, and they were in fact waiting to die. I don't know if you know this play. It's called Who Will Carry the Word by Charlotte Delbo.
No.
And it's a French play. It's a brilliant play. I highly recommend it to everybody who's on this call. And it's rarely done because it's just so upsetting in the way that it's portrayed, and then through the words that Charlotte Delbo writes for them. And Charlotte Delbo herself was a survivor of Auschwitz. She was a French woman in the resistance. Her husband and she were caught. She was a playwright as well before she was taken to the camps. And then she was her husband, I think, was shot right away. And then she was taken to Auschwitz, and she was not Jewish, and she was a political prisoner, but she was with all the other women in the section of Auschwitz for women who were political prisoners. And they're sitting there and they're waiting, and they're remembering what it was like to be a woman in France or in Belgium, and you know, the perfume they used to wear and the food they used to eat, and how their mothers or boyfriends would treat them. And all they had together was this waiting and waiting. And I really felt that in your play as well. And that's why I love the sections with the interludes, where, you know, they're dancing and they're, you know, because they get a chance to kind of break out and break away from this monotony of waiting, of this ritualized. And I also love that. I love the directing of it too. And I'm sure you had something to do with it, but you know, the director also was brilliant in the way that
I would want to give full credit to Sarah Norris, who directed.
Oh, great.
It, because she was so innovative. We had so many great dynamic conversations. I knew that when I wrote it, I wanted to have space for in between scenes for the girls to do. I felt like they would always want to get back to being girls, you know, that no matter what horror they're experiencing, that need to just get back to whatever normal is, right? So I said, like, they can dance, they can braid each other's hair, they can whatever girl things that you can. And I think what she did with the choreography she brought in a wonderful choreographer, and then so much imagination. And it was an amazing experience because I was able to, when she, she would bump it up a notch, which made me able to bump up the script a notch, and then she would get inspired and I would get inspired, and it was really a thrilling collaboration with this particular
Yeah,
production.
but I found also the interludes provided not only a way for them to explode and show their exuberance and their life force, where they could just be girls and not be caught in that monotony and in the what they were waiting for. They're waiting for death. I mean, that's all that they're waiting for. It's the same as the women in Auschwitz, and being able to do that took the play, I think, to another place. It took it outside of us just trying to relate to them and the situation that they were in. And I don't know if you were consciously doing this, but it really made it for me quite surreal and
Mm.
less of this. And I found also the references that you had, Margot or Anne, as you say, Anna and Frank. I don't know if you meant this either, but there's the red coat as well, which reminds me of Spielberg in Schindler's List and the girl in the red coat. Maybe I'm reading more into it than
No,
I
as a
should.
matter of fact, I mean, a lot of people have pointed that out, and I had I thought I had completely forgotten about that. I didn't when I wrote it. When I wrote it, I remember thinking of it in sort of black and white terms. So then when she came in with the red coat, I wanted it to pop, but I guess I was, I guess somewhere deep inside I remembered Spielberg. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you're saying, well, and then you make it very clear, though. This is a red coat. Where did you find? What a beautiful red coat. Where did you get it? I found it. Someone left a red coat. Oh, after we cleaned it up and took off the patches, that that was great. I love that moment. And then not only referencing Spielberg in this red coat, which we're all also supposed to get when we see the girl in the red coat, we're supposed to feel, so emotionally connected to this. But it's like you, through the humor and through these interludes that I found to be surreal, you kind of cut off that moment of getting so emotionally caught up,
Mm.
which makes us think. And that to me is a kind of theater that I love. It's much more Brechtian. It's a way to think about what's going. You know what Brecht said, how I want people to laugh when they're supposed to cry, and I want people to cry when they're supposed to laugh. And once again, it may not be something that you thought of, but to me, it's a very European thing. There's another play also that I was thinking about, which I produced years ago when I was a grad student. It's called Laughter by Peter Barnes. And the original title of it was called Auschwitz. And it's all a kind of Hogan's Heroes comedy about Hitler and how you're not supposed to make jokes about Hitler. So, of course, everybody in the office is making jokes about Hitler. And if they get caught, the Gestapo is going to come and they're going to throw them, in jail. And meanwhile, they're sending Jews to concentration camps while they're making all these jokes about Hitler that they're not supposed to do. And here you had these girls also trying not to make jokes about Hitler, and yet they do.
Yeah, well, part of, they're young. They're young, and they've probably been, if this is taking place like in around 1940, like late 43, 44, he's been a presence in their lives for a really, really long time. And so, I mean, that's the thing about being able to tell a story through young people, right? Is that they're that wide-eyedness, that innocence. And so naturally, it's like the way that children say the craziest, sometimes the most embarrassing things, right? But it makes everybody laugh because there isn't necessarily judgment in it, or there isn't a lot of thought in it. It's just observations. So I think it was as a writer, it was a gift that these were young women, because I could impose some drips, some like dripping awareness with them, instead of coming in fully realized,
It's like the emperor has no clothes, and they're saying that, look, he's naked,
Yeah, yeah,
But then they're
yeah,
also, I mean, you have this incredible moment about telling the truth.
yeah,
And I really loved how that whole, maybe you could talk more about that and about what you were trying to do there.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a complicated few years, as we all know. And this idea of the truth being something that's mutable, the truth that's being something that's, everybody has their own truth. Um, and I thought how hard we work sometimes to avoid the truth. We don't want to know. I mean, I think about it as I mean, I live in Venice, California. The homeless situation here is just staggering right now. And sometimes I look away because I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. It's overwhelming. I don't know how I'm supposed to get, like Hilda, I don't know how I'm supposed to get through the day knowing this truth. I don't know sometimes how to get through the day when I open up the paper or I listen to the radio and I'm hearing about another mass shooting. I don't, you know, how do you get through the day knowing what the truth is? So we all have to put all these things in front of us all the time to keep going. And it was a really thrilling build for me to get. I didn't know that it was going to go there, but to get to the point where Hilda would say, I don't want to know the truth. I don't want to know about pain.
Mm-hmm.
How am I supposed to get through the day knowing about pain? I felt like that. I felt that that was her chance to be honest. And for her to say that, she is the one who is the most in denial. So I think for Hilda to say it is when, for all of them, the puppet strings get cut. And they're no longer being propped up by the stories that they've been telling themselves all this time.
Yeah, and this, not wanting to know reflects today to not wanting to admit the things that are going on in plain sight.
Yeah.
The insurrection on January 6th.
Yeah.
60% of Republicans believe that, that wasn't Trump, and Trump was elected president, and QAnon exists.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't want to know the truth.
Right. And here in the moment of coming to what could be considered fascism.
Yeah. And the thing that was so striking to me in, this play for me was really, it was very impulsively written. And it was very much a journey of discovery for me as like I had my fingers on the keyboard. I mean, sometimes I was writing like, oh God, what are they doing to each other? It came, I think, from a pretty deep place. But what became very clear to me was just because you are privileged, which these girls were, right? They are the future of the Reich. They are girls of good German stock who are going to continue Hitler's plan. And still, he's choosing them to test their food for poison. So it became alarmingly clear to me that just because you align yourself with the dictator does not mean that you're going to get a pass. It does not keep you safe. It does not keep you safe.
No, and that, in fact, anyone in Germany could be used in that way, girls and men, and in this case, girls. And girls or young women were meant to see themselves as ultimately, and you kind of allude to that, they're the ones that are going to bear children to be the next Nazis, and almost in a very real sense, the children that they're having are Hitler's children.
Mhm.
In fact, they are bearing Hitler's children, no matter who the men are. It doesn't matter. They're not the fathers. Hitler is the father. It's the Immaculate Conception, and he's their God. And I love that, the way it was directed when they received the food and
Mhm.
they're holding their hands out. When we hear, the sound of a boot or a heavy sound, and then they hold their hands out to receive, and it's as though they're receiving, and then walking around the table. And so very ritualized. I thought that was a great moment. It makes it seem, I mean, not just seem, it was, Hitler was God.
Yeah, I mean, I think he certainly was, and they sort of trade off their fantasies of him as a father, as a god, as a lover, as a movie star. I mean,
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
were.
talk more about the movie stars. I was trying to listen. I had trouble a little bit hearing on the stage there because the sound,
Young women who love movie stars. I mean, what young women don't love movie stars?
Sorry, David, can you start that again? The internet completely froze.
Oh,
When
it
you
froze for
brought
a
up,
second.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, you guys
Oh,
have to see
sorry,
my
everybody.
face. I only
Oh,
put my face on because it fully froze.
no.
Yeah, where you were talking about the movie
Talking
stars.
about movie
I'll
stars.
take my face off.
Yeah, that's okay. You have a good face. It's a fine face. Yeah, about movie stars, about film, about Hollywood. I mean, that's also interesting. And Quentin Tarantino gets into that too with Inglourious Bastards, and the filmmakers, and making a film that's a kind of glamorous film. Of course, it's going to show German propaganda, but they hate all these Jewish filmmakers in Hollywood. So the films are so Jewish, but of course the German films are going to show what it means to be a real German. And then the Shoshana Dreyfus becomes the one who's going to show them what it means to kill a Jew, and then the whole movie theater gets set on fire by celluloid itself, by the film itself.
Right.
So that's, that was a great moment in that movie. But, also the reflecting on film here, I think creates and goes along so nicely, creates a nice through line with reality and truth, and them not knowing what reality, or not wanting to know reality. And like all of us, I mean, that's why we love film as well, because it takes us out of our usual life. And here they are, trying to figure out what it's like to go to bed with Frank Sinatra, or to, but still, Hitler is reality.
Yes.
And when he comes, or, maybe he comes there or not, but still it's, and also there was that great scene where, the new girl coming in, what's her name?
That's Margot.
Margot, that is Margot, right. And she pretends that she has been poisoned.
Poison, yes. Right.
Yes. Talk more about that.
Well, because when Margot came in, I realized that she was a bit of I sort of thought of Margot as that, a little bit of a princess in her home, her parents, kind of that sort of cluelessness that comes from privilege, right? But good natured, sweet and good natured, and so I knew she was going to come and rile things up a bit. And at some point, like they say, one scene they're like, "I'm so bored. I almost wish one of us would get poisoned just to break up the monotony,"
Mm-hmm.
And Margot is bored out of her mind, and Margot doesn't like being bored. And she wants to have some fun, so she impulsively decides to pretend that she's choking.
Right, but then Lisa smacks her.
She smacked. Yeah, because then they realize how real it is. Because in that moment, they know that's the thing that they've been fearing. That's the thing that they have pushed down as much as possible. So when Margot does that, all the fear that they've been pushing down just comes spewing up. And Liesel, who's always kind of the moderator and always trying to make things okay, she's the one that has to slap Margot and say, don't you ever do that again. It's not funny. That is not funny. That's all.
That's not something you can joke about.
No. And I think I must say, I think the girls just did a gorgeous job of navigating that moment, because everybody sort of, I find in the theater, when I see it live, when she first starts choking, people start gasping and go, ah! And then when she says, oh, got you, they start laughing, and then boom, it goes just silent. And I think for the actors to move through that so beautifully is.
And that moment, I mean, that's what laughter in the face of atrocity can do, that you can't get when everybody's feeling so emotionally caught up in the story of Anne Frank or whoever it is. And by creating these moments of everything's okay, we can joke, and then boom, we found that as well when I did the play Laughter by Peter Barnes. And it's so much about how the audience, in order to appreciate true horror, can't just get emotionally caught up in it. I think it needs to be pulled out. The rug needs to be pulled out. Yeah, go ahead.
You have to be set. I think you have to get a little bit comfortable. The laughter can make you a little bit comfortable. You can a little bit of relief. So then when it comes in contrast to what's going on, it's that much more impactful, I think. I think it also, humor comes out of naturally putting ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances and seeing what they do. And I think a lot of behavior is just naturally very humorous. You just have to tease it out a little bit.
Yeah.
And there were times, I mean, look, I was worried about some of this, and I did find it a couple times in productions, people came up to me and said, is it okay that I laughed? And I said, oh yeah, it's okay. I didn't get that much. The play went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019, and we had a tremendous experience there. And I did not find when they were majority European audiences, they had no problem laughing. They were just, they went right for it. But the Americans have been a little more reluctant.
Yeah, your play is much more European that way. And I really found that to be, I think, refreshing, because we dwell so much sometimes on creating a reality of horror that we don't gain a distance to reflect on it instead, and then to ask ourselves some of these questions about, are we appreciating the lies that we're participating in? Like you said, are we actually participating and making it even worse because we're not, we're being complicit? There's a complicitousness as well. Unfortunately, but these women, I mean, I don't, once again, you don't want to blame the victim. They are victims. And despite the fact that they hate Jews, or actually we don't quite know completely, because one of them, I mean, who is it at the beginning? Anna, yeah, she talks about having a Jewish friend. I mean, she doesn't say Jewish, but the implication's there. And there was what is it like to live among people? All of a sudden they're gone.
Yeah.
Or we're not supposed to like them anymore.
Right. Right. People that were your friends. She said they were so nice. I didn't know that they were enemies. You know, she didn't know. She didn't know.
Right.
And because, you know, again, like, because they're young, they can say these things, and it can land on us, I think, in a particular way. You know, somebody that interviewed me about this play a while ago said to me, well, they sort of intimated that the girls were, I mean, they weren't Nazis particularly, you know, but he said, well, that they were complicit, which, okay, but he said, what if they had just refused? You know, they went along. What if they refused to taste the Führer's food? And I said, I mean, I feel like if Hitler tells you to eat your peas, you eat your peas. I don't know how you get out of that. You know, I don't know. Not to mention the fact, I mean, I think another interesting aspect of all of this is that people are starving. You know, I think at this point in the war, people are starving. People don't have food.
Yeah, and you say that in the play, and that's a very real thing.
Yeah. And so you get fed, but you might die. I mean, I don't know. I don't think these aren't choices that any of us really want to have to make. But I mean, you know, it's an interesting question. It's like, are they guilty? Are they complicit? Or are they children that are being used? You know, there have been in the last couple of years a lot of articles about young people doing, you know, Heil Hitler in colleges and taking pictures and thinking that it's funny, or children spouting some of this stuff. And it's like, we got to leave these kids alone.
Mm-hmm.
Got to leave these kids alone, you know. The indoctrination of children, and they become weapons of war, and that happens all over the world. I mean, this is a problem all over the world. So.
Yeah, and they become brainwashed. I met one of the leaders of the Nazi youth, and he actually had met Hitler. His name was Adolf Heck, and he toured around. He was in his, I guess, early 20s when the war ended. And he toured with a Jewish woman who was a survivor of Auschwitz. And they toured together and they gave talks. And it was really not just moving, but to hear the two of them speak from their different perspectives. And one of the things that he talked about was how really, you know, the only thing they knew was Hitler. And they were growing up knowing him as their God.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they not just believed, but they couldn't separate. I mean, and you talk about, they couldn't separate their bodies from that. And a lot of your play also, which is something I emphasize in my classes on Holocaust theater and how the plays are often depicted, a lot of it has to do with the body.
Mm.
The way the body is then, in a sense, colonized by fascism as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's particularly interesting in this case for me because of the element of food. You know?
Right.
And another step in this is there are a lot of complicated relationships. Young women have complicated relationships with food in general, right? There's the point where when after Anna's disappeared and Hilda says, you know, I'm sure she threw up after every meal. Nobody's that thin when they get 3 meals a day, you know, and because young women in food women in food are a complicated scenario. And so to me, that just added one more layer to this. Right.
Yeah. Well, I see here that we're being asked to see if there are any questions. So I'm seeing some really very complimentary comments about the play itself. And one person writes, "Oh, the play is Brechtian, but it's not didactic." Absolutely, you're absolutely right about that. Not that Brecht was always so didactic, but still, yes. And let's see, are there any other questions in the chat? It's just comments about how much people love the play. But we're going to end in a few minutes. So if you want to get your questions in, yeah, let's talk about food a little bit more. And, you know, when we think about food, we usually think about nourishment. We also think about memories. We think about family. We think about friends. We think about our enjoying ourselves. We think about even holidays. But here, when they're eating, they're thinking about, or maybe not thinking about, death. So what they're putting in their mouth, into their body, that then could take over their body, is something that will destroy them.
Right. Right. I mean, they are potentially complicit in their own destruction.
Right, but they're made to be complicit in their destruction.
Yeah.
It's like, how Jews were rounded up in order to go, and people said, well, they went to the gas chambers like sheep. That was such a despicable statement, which was actually made by a Jew as well many years later. And unfortunately, that kind of stuck for a long time and made Jews who knew nothing about fighting, knew nothing about war, what were they supposed to do? And then they were rounded up and didn't know that they were going to die in death camps and extermination camps.
Well, and even if you have an inkling that it's not going to go well, right? How can you imagine? How can you possibly imagine that things will come to that? You don't know. And I mean, I think that's kind of what one of the great things that you guys are doing, and one of the great things about theater is that you can try to have compassion for these characters that are very easy to judge, whether it be, Jews as sheep or young German women or whatever it is. If you can get inside them and try to understand who they were, then maybe you can answer some of these questions. I don't think any of us faced with these situations knows how we would react. I think it's very easy to throw stones, but in a play, in something like this, you can investigate it a little bit more and maybe find space for characters that you wouldn't necessarily find space for in real life.
But also that point that you make about the imagination. How can we imagine that? I mean, we can't. I mean, it's beyond our imagination, and yet it happened.
Right.
It just is, it boggles our minds. So what you do in your play, which I love about it, which is why I like absurdity more when it comes to dealing with the Holocaust, is when we see the reality in front of us, we then can become anesthetized to it. Mm-hmm. I don't think what you do anesthetizes us. It shocks us, both because of what can happen to these women, and it shocks us because it's underneath every single thing that we do almost every day. Yeah. I have a question here from, this is actually from one of our playwrights, from Jake, who had Max and Willie, a little piece
well
of
done.
that before
well
yours.
Done.
Yes, well done. So he says, in our research for Max and Willie, it became clear that even though the people knew something horrible was waiting at the end of the line, they didn't want to know.
Yeah. It's like Hilda. It's like Hilda in the play. How am I supposed to get through the day knowing about pain? I don't want to know the truth. Then you might as well just curl up and give up, If you're going to put one foot in front of the other, I think you need a healthy dose of denial.
Yeah, and in Jake's play, for Max and Willie, I mean, you have these incredibly talented cabaret performers, and what is it that they know? They only know how to give life and to be exuberant, and what is the only thing that they have that they can do in order not just to survive, but it's who they are. That's their identity.
Right. Of course. And they could give some joy to other people. You know,
Hmm.
if you can grab a second of that,
Right,
why not?
right, right. Well, we're gonna have to wrap up. I could go on and on about this because I just think that, there's so many different levels. I also see a lot of different plays here too that are kind of overlapping and intersecting, but
Mhm.
we'll leave that for another time. I see Casey uh,
I'm
giving us
wrapping
the
it up
signal.
for Michelle. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you come and check out tomorrow night, which is Women in Spirituality. It's some incredible plays. Short play called From Baghdad to Brooklyn. A full-length piece called Mikvah, which all takes place in a mikvah in Israel. It's in Hebrew with subtitles, and A Woman Before Glass. Saturday night is Black and Jewish Allyship. I feel kind of like a presenter right now, which is a little too much. And we'll be doing a wonderful talk back each night. So please join us. If you haven't registered for those evenings, please do on Showtix or reach out to us, and we'll be sure to send along the links. Thank you so much, Michelle. You're incredible. Our wonderful playwrights tonight. And David, thank you for a wonderful moderation.
Great.
Thanks
Well,
for having
thank
me.
you. Okay. Good seeing you all.